Well, this is the funny story involves you because it really is. It's what came up. It wasn't just because you're doing this interview. But I remember being in French class in my freshman year, and I was realizing how hard it was to be at St. Louis U High. I was no longer special, like academically. And I remember one morning, and you probably remember this. I think we've talked about it. I had not properly prepared for my vocabulary, and Mr. Keefe called on me, and I just failed halfway through the list. And instead of just, he questioned it in some fashion, I blew up, and it was not in my nature or character at all. I just lost my stuff and just started yelling and saying, damn it, no, I don't know these answers, and quit asking me questions. And I just remember like just losing it. And the reason it's a funny story was I think that was one of our initial bonding moments, Wayne, because you were in that class and hated Mr. Keefe also. And it was when we started the roots of our friendship, which, as is evidenced by our being here, has lasted 50 years or 54 years. So there was that.
I had, I don't remember, was it Keefe or O'Keefe, but I took French. And I remember the language lab and trying to learn French with the microphones and sitting in those little booths and whatnot. And I was horrible at it. And again, it's one of those things, if I had looked back on it now, again, don't know that I would have taken French. I clearly would have taken Spanish, and my heart and soul would have been in it. And I think I would have, enjoyed it and done better.
I remember I took Russian for 4 years, and I had George Morris 3 of the 4, but I had Pascalucci junior year. And I remember one time I was sitting in the last row, and he had a lady come in from Russia. She was in for 2 or 3 weeks, and so she came in, and it was sort of an open, you could ask her any questions. And I asked her, I said, well, is Lev Yashin still the goalie for the national team? And Pascalucci was sitting right behind me, and boom, right in the middle of the back. What the hell was that for? He thought I was being a wise guy, but it was a serious question because she knew who the guy was, just because Pascalucci didn't know anything about soccer.
I took Russian.
Oh, okay.
I thought it would have been good. There was an incredible amount of cheating that went on in Mr. Morris's class. So that I think the second year it was Pascalucci was the teacher, and he came in speaking Russian, and we were all going, what? Что or whatever. And so we basically had to start over, and I never really learned anything but hello.
Russian, and Mr. Morris and Mr. Pascalucci, I loved Russian. I probably worked harder at Russian than any other subject, and I got the poorest grades. I would work my ass off and maybe get a B.
Well, I didn't study any. I mean, I barely got through. I was one of those Russian guys that they asked us not to take the 3rd year.
Was able to finally go to Moscow, spent a week there. My rudimentary Russian enabled me to order, ask directions. I even was able to hail a gypsy cab, which, is a cheaper way than the real cabs there. But when I would stumble with the language, like you often find, natives are flattered, and they bend over backwards to kind of help you.
The choice of a foreign language. And it actually became quite easy. Since we had spoken at home Croatian, I decided to go with the Russian language. And so George Morris became kind of a favorite over time. Those who had Mr. Pascalucci tell me that I was fortunate to be with George instead of the other.
Um, Mr. Chang, and it's embarrassing, some of the stories. I'll tell one on Spur. Spur used to say F you, and in a very polite way or whatever. And then there was a guy named, and Mr. Chang never got it, never understood it. There was a guy, one of our classmates who I don't think finished, was Jack Lohr. One day, and to mimic Spur, Lohr said intercourse you, and Chang knew what that was. And I mean, he dragged him out. He got chugged. He got all sorts of trouble. And Spur, I guess, just watched Lohr get. After Mr. Chang, there were some guys who were tremendous. Tim Lane, Kalachi. There were some guys that were phenomenal. There were some guys, I think I was kind of in the middle. There were some guys that were, barely hanging on. Mr. Chang had to relocate his family to Arizona because he had a child who had asthma or some condition like that. And they brought in to replace him a guy who was a grad student over at WashU. And this guy had been in country long enough that he knew, he was nobody's fool. And then he went and tried to see where everybody was in their knowledge. And he talked to Jack Enright. Jack Enright said, I had to get out of there as soon as I could, or I would have flunked out of school. The other thing that Chang used to do, he would have this thing where he would ask questions in Chinese, and then you would have to answer, and then you could kind of call on somebody to answer. And the usual triangle was Fleming to Martini to Enright. And whoever was being called on, the other two would beg him not to call on, please don't call. And you just knew they were going to do it. It was entertaining.
Took Spanish.
Okay, so Mr. Voss, or?
I had Mr. Voss. I actually took all 4 years of Spanish. And I actually had the opportunity to live in Mexico in my third year of college for one semester. And I was thankful to Mr. Voss, Mr. Walker, and the other Spanish teachers for preparing me so well for that experience.
Well, this goes in line with my character. I tried to figure out what was the easiest language. So I took Spanish because somebody told me that was the easiest one to learn. So anyway, I took Spanish and I took Latin, and I figured I'm never going to make it through advanced Spanish, right? That's a zero right there for two reasons. One, I didn't like Spanish, and Bob Voss didn't like me. So I decided to take Latin for 2 years and Spanish for 2 years and not have to deal with the language problem, which I later found out some guys, they didn't do well in their foreign language, didn't take Latin, and they let them out of the rest of the requirement.
Well, I go back to freshman Latin and Father Kellett. He was a character, but he made me feel like I was part of the whole deal. He got the whole class engaged, and he joked with everybody, and it just was it was such a fun experience for me that I made the mistake of dropping my foreign language and then having to do 4 years of Latin. And it was a damn small class when you got to senior year. I think there's 5 of us. So
yeah, I had Kellett for Latin, and I dropped that as soon as I could. I had so much, languages are not my forte.
And the only Latin that I remember besides the reproductive systems of monkeys that I had to memorize in Jug was E ad infernum. Go to hell. That was Father Kellett's favorite. Rogers. E ad infernum.